Yeah, just total by Jake Paul,
You
right?
can't have people coming in making these mismatches because it then becomes a farce.
Like Shakur versus Tank would be a really, really good fight. And it's
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Zapata Brand with George Zapata. I am George Zapata, and today I am joined by someone who I haven't had on a little bit. My man, Kevin Iole from KevinIole.com. Kevin, are you still at KevinIole.com? Are you still doing stuff?
I have not written anything. I retired at the end of UFC 317, and so it's been almost 2 months now. I can't believe it's that long, right?
I know, right?
And I miss writing. I don't miss like the reporting and all the other stuff. If I could just sit here and I'm actually, what I'm thinking about doing, not for money or anything, but just for the fun of it, is thinking about going on a site like medium.com and then not writing just fights. Like I'd write, like, for instance, the Jake Paul stuff from yesterday. I had pretty strong opinions. I guess we're going to talk about it here in a little bit. I was going to write something. So I think, like, on Medium, what I might do is just write whatever strikes me. When the new iPhone comes out, I'll talk about the iPhone. Whatever in life hits me. If I want to write about the Steelers, if I want to write about, the Red Sox, the Pirates, whatever it would be, just write about general sports, general life, general world, and not have to worry about being a reporter and breaking news and getting a hold of all, tracking down sources and things and just having fun. So I think I might do that.
Well, I was with you July for your last July. What was that?
June 28th.
June 28th, UFC 317. I was there. It's a lot of work.
You were there? I don't remember that.
International Fight Week. Come on, I followed you around with a camera.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you were there. Now I remember.
Putting that documentary together will be done by the end of the week. That's a lot of work, man. That is just a lot of work. I saw what you would do and where you had to be at certain times. It's still a lot.
Well, and I knew you were coming, so I actually got a lot of stuff done in advance of your arrival, that I was able to spend time with you and your wife. And like I wasn't, during normal fight weeks, like I'm not in advance like I was there. So that was, you were company, so I had to make sure I kind of got ready for you.
Yeah, well, if it's more than what we did, which obviously it was, so it's a lot of work. And, I could tell how it could, be a little strain if you're doing a one-man show. If you're a one-man guy, you got to be on top of your game. And you certainly were that day, though. You were the whole week. You were on top of your game. My gosh. And that documentary will be coming out. You will be seeing it.
I was happy with a lot of my pre-fight coverage. My post-fight coverage was tough because that night, I was retiring. I knew that was going to be the last column that I wrote. There was so much that had happened in the show, right? The main event was unbelievable, but now I also had, a good co-main event. There were other fights on the card that I wanted to comment on and write about. And I was kind of in a weird situation. And then, when I was working afterwards, you're sitting next to me doing nothing. And so, like, I feel badly because I'm making you wait for me to end. And so, like, I just had this whole, so the ending didn't work out like I would have hoped. Right. Like, I wish I had written better stuff and had a better final column. Not that the column that I posted was terrible, but it wasn't really what I had hoped for.
Oh, but I was just trying to get B-roll and all that other stuff. That worked out for me fine. I was on East Coast time, so that 1 a.m. was, that was rough.
It was,
so
yeah.
Right over to the casino when I got home. So it was good for me, though.
Yeah, when you live on the West Coast as a reporter and then you're covering these fights, the worst part is like the fights on the East Coast, because almost always Sunday morning you want to get home first thing, right? So I'd have a 7:00 flight out of New York, say, which is 4:00 Vegas time, which means you got to get up, So basically the fights would end and I would write my column, get to my hotel, pack, and get in a cab and go to the airport. There was no sleeping on fight night. Then you would just, fly home. So, so if there's one thing I don't miss about my career, George, it's those Sunday morning trips home after the fights the night before.
I wasn't under any pressure at all, and flying just that trip east to coast to west coast, that's brutal. It is brutal.
Yeah.
And especially if you have like Frontier or Spirit or something like that. Thank God I was.
Yeah, I never did that, but
no,
I flew actually one time in my life, and I flew one direction on each airline. When I went to Miami to cover UFC 299, I think I flew from Vegas to Fort Lauderdale. You couldn't even fly to Miami on Spirit, and then I flew back on Frontier. And oh my God, they were both horrendous.
Terrible. Well, I got you on, Kevin. We haven't spoken. Well, we've texted back and forth, but we haven't spoken on air for a little bit here. And big news last night. Well, actually during the day, Jake Paul, Gervonta Davis set for. Now there was two reports. One was November 14th. The other one was the 15th at State Farm Arena. I don't know which one is.
I believe it's going to be the Friday night. So whatever that Friday night is,
I think it's the 14th. There. And I saw a little bit of what you posted. I haven't really talked to you about it because I wanted to save it for today. What are your takes on this? I have strong takes, and I'm sure we're probably on the same page.
Yeah, just total bullshit by Jake Paul, right? I mean, and you know what? PBC has to be called out in this too. They have one of the biggest stars in boxing, and they're putting him in this farcical fight. And they are struggling for survival, PBC. They are just falling apart. You know, the Pacquiao fight did terrible. Terribly promoted. Pacquiao was hardly available. It was just that they were too cheap to hire Pacquiao's normal publicist. Just horrendous, right? It was very, very, very bad. And PBC's been, really struggling a lot. So now they have Gervonta Davis. They have a fight there with Lamont Roach that, I think the rematch would be of interest. The first fight wasn't of that much interest to people because everybody thought that Tank was going to squash Lamont Roach. But now after such a good fight and after what had happened, I think there was interest in the rematch. And they come up with this fight where, think about it, Jake Paul on November 15th of 2024, when he fought Tyson, weighed 227 3/4. Tank in his fight against Lamont Roach was 133.8. What are you talking about? And he comes from saying that he was going to fight Anthony Joshua, who would be bigger, taller, strong, all those things, to go into fight a guy at 130. What the hell are you talking about?
Do you think that was like a playing checkers and chess there with Jake Paul, putting it out there? I want to fight Anthony Joshua, knowing Joshua's not going to take that fight. He will not take that fight. I didn't think he would take it anyway. And then also say, well, I'll take Tank.
I think Anthony will take the fight, right, at some point if Jake doesn't lose to Tank, which I think he might lose. We can get into that later, but I think that Anthony probably will fight him because it'll be like Francis Ngannou, maybe even easier, right? At least Francis Ngannou is not a high-level professional boxer, but he's a high-level professional fighter. And he knows what it's like to be in the ring, and he's fought elite people before. So that translates, even though boxing and MMA are different sports, it translates to some degree. Jake is just like a mid-level, like low mid-level 60th ranked guy. He's mostly been a cruiserweight. I give him credit. I think he is a lot better than he was when he started. He's taking it seriously. It's just the fact, two things. Number one, you can't start a professional sport and expect to be at the highest level in the short period of time like he has been, right? It just doesn't work that way. And, number two, he's not getting the fights that'll, help him develop, right? If you think of every fight that he's taken, he's been significantly larger than everybody. He fought Nate Robinson, the NBA player who was 190. He fought Tyron Woodley twice, who was a 170-pound UFC champion. Ben Askren was a 170-pound champion. Anderson Silva was a 185er. That was at least closer in weight. Nate Diaz was a 155, 170 guy, right? Everybody he fought was significantly smaller than him on the way up. Plus, the only boxer in that group he fought was Tommy Fury, who he lost to, and Tommy Fury sucks. Tyson Fury, all-time great. Tommy Fury, horrendous, right? And Tommy Fury is terrible. and Jake lost to him, and that tells you where he is. And I think that so Jake's had all the advantages all along here. Then he fights Mike Tyson, and these idiots thought that the fight was fixed because Tyson couldn't punch. That is what happens when you get old in fighting. You can see the opening, but you can't pull the trigger. And as you remember, George, I did a commentary about it. Plus, I wrote an entire column saying exactly what would happen, that Tyson would look like he did. And these morons are going out there and saying the fight was fixed. And it was no more fixed than, it was fixed from the standpoint that, a 58-year-old guy was trying to box a 27-year-old guy. That was the only thing that was fixed about it. People forgot that Mike Tyson wasn't Mike Tyson for over 30 years, right? I mean,
right.
Tyson in his last actual fight was awful, right? Remember, he was awful in his last 4 or 5 actual fights. He was awful. So the fact that 20-some years would pass, and now you're going to expect him to, go back to the Mike Tyson of 1989. Come on.
No, we wouldn't have happened. And I knew that. We talked privately that it just, now that's why I turned my attention this way. Jake Paul is actually really good at marketing. Really good.
Oh, tremendous.
Okay. Whether his shows are put together good or not, and he doesn't have access to, doesn't give media access or not, whatever. What I saw at UFC 317 at Slap, and now I'm looking at what's going on now. The influencers for the eyeballs that are the TikTok, social media, that's getting the attention, and it's getting attentions of the purses of these big conglomerates, the TKOs. So they're putting the money behind that. That being said, how do you legitimize a fight between such a weight disparity and a size disparity without changing the rules?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how think about this when they square off. What is Jake Paul, 6'1.5", and Tank is 5'5", right? Imagine that nose to nose when they're standing there at the weigh-in. That's going to look, ridiculous, right? And hey, look, I think Tank beats him. And unless it is fixed, right? I mean, and I hate to think that it would be, and they have a promoter's license, which is very valuable to get. And, it's a crime to fix a fight. And I don't think it's going to be fixed. I don't, but, I don't see any way Jake Paul wins the fight unless that's the case. Right. And so he gets beaten by a 133.8 pound guy,
right. But let me ask you on that, with you saying that, with you thinking Tank would win, all the stuff that's going on with Tank now, he doesn't seem like a guy who can focus. And now I know I'm getting way out here on the limb here. If there was a guy who is, because he can't fight, he ain't fighting Lamont Roach,
right?
He's not going to fight Shakur Stevenson if his head isn't with it. Is he a type of guy? And just from what I've seen, all the issues outside the ring, you don't have your head on straight. Is there a chance that Jake can pick him off? Now, not that it would be this overall achievement, because the size difference is so massive, but there is a chance. I don't know if Tank is so into this and he wants to cash grab and get out, because he's been in and out of boxing for how long now? The last 3 years, I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out. I don't know. This could be a right picking for someone that he gets picked off here. Do you see any shot of that happening at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a small chance of it, right? I think, Jake, if you consider, I think Jake's best weight would be around 200, right? So if we say, he's 200, is he a hard punching cruiserweight? No, but I would say he's an average punching cruiserweight. And so if Tank got hit by a legitimate professional cruiserweight, especially with a combination, I think it could put him out. Now, the gap in skill level between Tank and Jake is so big that I don't think that happens. But, if Tank doesn't take it seriously, or even if he does take it seriously and he makes a mistake, I think that's where the intrigue lies, right? Like, there's nobody that, unless you don't know boxing at all, that thinks that Jake Paul is going to outbox Tank Davis. But, if Tank is outboxing him round after round after round, and then just makes a mistake, or he sticks his chin out like thinking he's safe and he gets caught, that's the only way. And I guess that's the only intrigue in the fight, the what if part.
Now, from a business angle. Is this good for Tank Davis?
I mean, he's going to, he's near the end of his career, right? So we know that whether he retires after this fight or he takes one, he's not going to fight 5 more times. I mean, he might fight twice more after Jake Paul, but I don't think we're going to see. So why, yes, it's good business for Tank because he's going to make a ton of money in this fight. He's going to get that exposure on Netflix to maybe audiences that don't know him, right? Boxing isn't what it was even 20 years ago in terms of exposure. So if you take Oscar De La Hoya in 1999 compared to Tank Davis in 2025, De La Hoya was far more known and bigger in that time than Tank is in this time. Tank being one of the 2 or 3 biggest stars in boxing now. But, when you relate it to, say 25 years ago, not quite the same. So I think, the going on Netflix will expose him to an audience that hasn't seen him before. And I think that could help him, and he's going to make a ton of money for the fight. There's no doubt he would never have taken the fight if he wasn't making in the 8 figures. And so, I don't think it's going to hurt him, but I think, the risk is, and this I think might be the first time, but the risk is all Jake Paul, right? I mean, most of these fights, if Jake Paul lost to Tyron Woodley, people say, well, yeah, Tyron Woodley was a UFC champion. Jake Paul's only fought a influencer and an NBA player. But now, now we're getting into Jake Paul's 12-1. He's got this reputation. He's been training for 5 years. And Tank Davis is 100 pounds less. You lose to that guy.
Okay, yeah, but I'm talking more on Davis as far as his brand.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, but I know he's going to make a lot of money, but as far as why would somebody then pay for Tank Davis if he's fighting these guys and not a Lamont Roach, not a Shakur Stevenson?
Well, so let's just spin it forward. So Tank fights Jake Paul and he beats him. Now, what I said, he's getting that exposure on Netflix. There's certain people. The reason I brought that De La Hoya comparison up, George, is to say that De La Hoya was bigger when he fought Trinidad going into the Trinidad fight in '99. De La Hoya was bigger at that point than Tank ever was in any of his fights, right? Boxing was bigger and was taken more seriously by the media and the public than it is now. So if Tank goes and he gets on Netflix and gets a huge number on Netflix, which I think it'll do, the women's fight that Netflix just had, Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano 3, they did 6 million worldwide. I would think Tank would do bigger than that. Let's say they do 12 million worldwide, double that audience. That's a lot of people that hadn't seen Tank before. So now when he comes back and assuming he beats Jake, and he goes to fight Shakur, that makes the fight bigger, I think. So I think from a business standpoint, if he the loser is going to be screwed, right? Less for Tank than for Jake. But if Jake blows Tank out, he's not going to get that much of a bump out of it. But people can write it off saying he fought a guy 100 pounds bigger. But if Jake loses, there's no way you can fight Anthony Joshua. You just got beat by Gervonta Davis. Now you want to fight Anthony Joshua?
Oh, it would be a hell of a pull if he can do it. If he could go after Joshua, I think that's a stupid move. And again, I don't blame Jake Paul necessarily. I blame just the people that have the big purses that are putting up this money for a fight like this, because it's pushing back the Lamont Roach. Like Lamont Roach deserves a rematch.
Yes, he won. Well, he won the fight. He got screwed.
The second Calvin Davis jumped in the ring, the fight was over. You can't touch. We know that. But it again leads to and I said this yesterday. It leads to the whole UBO thing that TKO is trying to do, where these certain people are going to have to get these title shots. You can't have people coming in making these mismatches, because it then becomes a farce. Like how that'd be like me jumping in there with somebody, or you know what I'm saying? That I'm okay with every now and then you have like a Randy Couture, James Toney, whatever, but there's no title that he's holding up. Tank's holding up here, a legitimate fight or 2 legitimate fights. In reality, it could be either one, and he's not doing it. There's no penalty. There's no, hey, you can't fight outside this realm. And that is why the boxing will always be the wild, wild west. This is another example of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take boxing and you sit here and you just say, I'm going to make the best fights that can be made. Some of the best fights that are out there in the championship fights aren't always great fights, but you have a lot like Shakur versus Tank would be a really, really good fight. And especially with Shakur now coming off this last win that he had right over Zapata. I thought Shakur looked great in that fight. And that renews interest in a fight with Tank, right? And those two are rivals, and both of them are guys that have pound for pound number one potential, right? I'm not saying that either one of them is pound for pound number one, but from the day Shakur turned pro, I was writing, I think this guy has the talent to be the best fighter in the world. He's been up and down as a pro, but now that's a big fight. But I don't think the numbers would do, what they should do really. But if we went in boxing and said we're going to make those fights, eventually people would catch on. Hey, these fights are good, because when there are good fights, you see the public's reaction to them, right? And the fact that 58-year-old Tyson drew 120 million viewers against Jake Paul shows you how big boxer can be if it's done right, and Tyson became big in his era and never lost that aura. And he still, 30 years after his prime, still was drawn over 100 million fans. I think boxing can come back if it's done properly, but we're all this craziness that we see happen. People don't want to build a business. They want a overnight sensation. They want to put one show on and get rich. And that's the problem that a lot of these promoters have had over the years.
Do you think we see the trend of the YouTubers going into, or the influencers going into boxing? Or, I mean, I know it wouldn't work in UFC, but going into boxing, do you see that becoming a trend now?
There's that whole Misfits boxing thing, and they're doing pretty good, right? I mean, they're not doing, numbers like UFC is doing, but I think that they're,
that's fun stuff. You know what I mean?
They're real, there are people that are going in and fighting, and it's being passed off as boxing, right? That's the problem. When there's what was the goofball's name that fought Logan Paul? Dylan Dennis is he's an MMA fighter, and he's more, he's really not a fighter anymore. He hasn't had a fight.
Right.
But this is a guy that was a world-class jiu-jitsu fighter, a guy that was incredible in jiu-jitsu. There was a lot of expectations that he would become a really good MMA fighter. Now you put, a guy like that in against Logan Paul and the, other influencer types, you're blurring the line and you're making it look like Logan Paul's a legitimate fighter, or whoever, some of these musicians, like some of the names I've never heard of before. Right. So people have to tell me who they are. But, some of the guys that fight in these influencer fights, or in, the women's influencer fights too, who the hell are they? And, there was one stripper that actually, turned out to be pretty good, right? And who was it? She beat a legitimate, women's boxer. And that's the problem with that, right? That, you get that going, and it, now it blurs the line. But if we just went out there and we could say, hey, we rule the world, we're the commissioner, and we're going to, make the fights. Not all the fights are going to be great, right? But there's going to be a lot of them, and we're going to see the fights that we want to see, and you're going to get a lot of fun, and you're going to have a lot of attention on boxing. But it just, people, you can't be, the promoters are like they cry wolf all the time, right? Okay, we're going to do it right now, and this is it. And then they never follow through with it. And so eventually people just don't believe them anymore, and they've given up on it.
Yeah. Well, a legit fight that's coming up, and I just want to hear your insight a little bit, is the Canelo Alvarez fight coming down. I'm not going to get into it too deep, but I wanted to know, have you been hearing anything as the fight is approaching, what the camps look like? Anything like that? Have you heard anything? Because really, for a fight this magnitude, hasn't really gotten enough buzz yet. I don't know if they're just waiting to the last couple September hits. I don't know.
I am shocked, to be honest with you. And I saw this goes into what I was just saying. And you called it the Canelo Alvarez fight. I'm going to call it the Terence Crawford fight, because I think Crawford wins the fight, right? So I think it's the Crawford fight. But Crawford put out last week, I'm shutting down my camp and I'm not doing interviews till I get to Vegas. What? There hasn't been anything out there. They're trying to sell 65,000 or more seats because you're in a football stadium, you can put them on the ground too. So I don't know what it's going to be scaled to, but it's going to be a big, big, big number. And you're telling me that you're not doing interviews anymore? Like, this is the freaking problem. And you get these PR people who think that they're protecting their fighter. You want to make the fighter the money, you go out there and you grind it and you get those interviews done and you create awareness so that it's all over the place, right? And the fact that it's going to be a big event. I don't want to say it's not, but I'm disappointed as we sit here and we record this on August 21st and that fight is September 13th. There is not nearly enough stuff out there, not nearly enough.
It was funny because I was in Atlantic City last week, and I remember I was at the Mark Chiettis Arena with the convention hall. I could remember when like the big fights were happening, the place was buzzing, and before I just remember those times. Nowadays, I don't know if they just think they could put a couple tweets out or they could do whatever. I haven't seen an event, a massive event, in a long time. I mean, you're talking where they were on USA Today, they were on Good Morning America. You haven't seen that in a while. Terence Crawford missed the boat when he beat Errol Spence, went on Joe Rogan, and then took 8 months off. Like, you can't do that. He's not a well-known enough person. If you go down the street, not many people know who Terence Crawford is.
Yeah, no, I agree. I did, in what was it, 2013 or 2014? I did this interview with Terence and I talked about his early life and, I talked to some of his school teachers, and he was preparing at that point to make a trip to Africa, to go to a village where they had non-potable water. And so he was going to try to, and they did bring clean water to these people, in this village. And, he was really a smart guy and really a great interview. But people weren't talking to him, back then. And I did this really in-depth piece and it was really good. And that side of him rarely gets brought out. Mark Kriegel did about 3-4 years ago, a phenomenal piece, talking to his mother and, really another good profile. But the Crawford's people don't let him get out there and do that kind of stuff. They try to protect him and keep him away from the media. And they don't seek those kind of things out. And Crawford is actually a really smart, really deep guy who, he has his issues, but he also, has a lot of good points. And he's a fantastic fighter. He should be 100 times bigger than he is now. And that he is not is a failure of his PR and marketing team.
And again, you'll never get a superstar developed if he's not out there promoting it himself. And then to say we're shutting it down, right. It didn't even start.
You're shutting it down before you even started.
I know. Then that never a good look for them. It's just why I didn't really do any pieces. I haven't even reached out to them because I was thinking it's got to be a longer way. And I realized it's only a few weeks away. They're gonna have the grand arrivals, but can't you justify a fighter just wanting to make as much money as he can, but getting out there and putting himself out there? Can you not justify that as a public relations guy?
I mean, I think that, that's why Fred Sternberg is so great, right? Fred Sternberg is in the Hall of Fame for a reason. And it wasn't just Manny Pacquiao. Fred is most associated with Manny Pacquiao, but you go back his entire career. He started when Sugar Ray Leonard was fighting, right? And Fred, did all these great things that, and he behind the scenes would create storylines and things. And he was relentless with the media and everybody, back when email first came out, it's laughable now to say when email first came out, but back when email first came out, everybody used to laugh at how many, how overwhelmed they were, by Fred with the emails, but he created this awareness of who, he had Winky Wright. And Winky was a nobody, a Hall of Fame level fighter, and nobody ever heard of him. And because he worked with Fred for a period of time, Fred built Winky. And I think that Winky Winky's talent got him into the Hall of Fame. But he wouldn't have gotten those votes if Fred hadn't built his profile and made some of the boxing writers realize, hey, this guy is really good, right? But you don't have that with these PR people today. And they'll say, oh, there's only YouTubers. But the problem is they make it so difficult for legitimate media, trained media. I don't want to deign YouTubers because I was a YouTuber or you're a YouTuber, right? And I don't want to rip, YouTubers, but there's not always people out there that are, they're just looking for clicks and they're not looking to do legitimate stories and tell the stories of the fighters. And I think that if you, as the publicist, really work hard, and if this had happened for, years and years and years, boxing would be in so much better shape. Andre Ward is another guy, right? Andre Ward, fantastic talent, but his publicist took the idea that I need to protect Andre from the media. No, most of the public did not know how freaking great Andre Ward was, maybe until the last fight or two of his career. And that should have been everywhere. And I'll use Fred as an example because, he's a modern guy doing it, but there were so many great publicists over the years and, they're gone and they haven't been replaced by similar people. Right. And just as a publicist calling 3 or 4 people up and at the biggest sites and saying, hey, do you want to interview Terence or do you want to interview Andre? That does not do you. And that's not honoring what Fred Sternberg did and what Teddy Brenner did. Like, let me tell a story about Teddy Brenner, and I won't even talk about, not Teddy Brenner, Irving Rudd. I apologize. Teddy Brenner was a matchmaker. Irving Rudd was a longtime boxing publicist, and he was so creative, but he was based in New York. He also did PR for Yonkers Raceway. You're familiar with Yonkers, aren't you, George?
Oh, yeah.
So
I lost a lot of money there.
so Irving, he would always before the racing season at Yonkers would begin, would call the New York media and say, hey, can you write? We're getting ready to start, and and we want to have get people knowing it's coming and coming out to the track and everything. And for one reason this year, nobody was doing it. People are saying, "Nah, we can't do it. We can't do it." So what Irving doesn't, because he gets turned down by media, and that was at a time when New York had 6 or 7 daily newspapers, and was overwhelmed with the amount of mainstream media. So what does he do? He goes out and he has a sign put up at the entrance right by where you would get off to go, and racing begins on whatever date it was, and he spelled horse racing wrong. And guess what happened? They took pictures of it and they put it in the paper. And that's what he was trying to get. He was trying to get the fact that, hey, the races are starting on Friday at 7:00, and the media wouldn't cover it. So he found another way to get it in by doing a misspelling. And then everybody, ha, 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 look at how stupid Yonkers is. But guess what? That was Irving being a genius. Well, that was the kind of stuff that happened all the time in boxing. And we could talk about the case of Manila Ice and Manny Pacquiao. And, that was another great one. I know the story, and I'll let Fred Sternberg tell that story. I'm not going to steal that one. But that's what does not exist in boxing anymore. That kind of creativity and that kind of bulldog mentality to get the media. They're like, oh, you're lucky to be talking to our guy. No. You as the fighter, even Terence Crawford, the greatest fighter in the world, should be thankful that media wants to talk to him, because you know what? When he's done, nobody's going to want to talk to him. And, you want to cement your legacy. And if you want to make the absolute most money like Mayweather did, Mayweather's a great example. He went from being considered not a draw to the greatest draw. I don't think he's the greatest draw of all time, but numbers wise, he has that argument, right? I think Muhammad Ali and Tyson are bigger draws than he was, but they fought in different eras. But, you know what I'm saying? The point carries.
But the blueprint was there when for someone to pick up the Mayweather blueprint and run with it. They didn't. They went the opposite direction. And I truly believe stories like old school WWE, I always bring them in. The stories make the fights more interesting, and they bring more of an audience to them.
Right.
And when that goes away, why would you care? If you're not invested in someone, why would you care? I mean, you say people don't want to talk. People want to talk to Crawford. I don't think many people want to talk to him, to be quite honest with you, because what's he got? What story does he have?
Well, they don't want to talk to him now because it's been 12 years of, an image being portrayed that isn't necessarily who he really is, right? I mean, if you sit and I even have one interview with Crawford on my YouTube channel. It was when I was at Yahoo, and it was done a while back. But if you look at that particular interview, right, he was really there wasn't anything deep to it, but he was insightful, and it showed a side of Terence Crawford beyond just specifically the fights we were talking about, things were going on that you don't often see. Crawford is a really compelling guy. But what most of the media now wants to do is, hey, what do you think of Canelo? What do you think of who you're going to fight next? That's it. The same thing over and over, just change the names. And part of that, we're at that point because the reporters who were good enough, George, to do those stories like a Mark Kriegel, they weren't regularly given the access that they needed to do it. This new breed of publicist that's out there. They have a spreadsheet and a checklist. And did I get, Yahoo to interview? Did I get ESPN to interview? Did I get Fox to do an interview? And they're not worried about the quality of the interview, and they're not worried about the message that's being delivered. And that, to me, is what the issue is when you look at the quagmire that boxing finds itself in.
And I remember you telling me when I first reached out to Fred Sternberg, I remember you saying, go with him. I can tell you, he will get you what you need when you need it. And there's never an issue even with the fighters. They're always like, yep, when do you need it? It's a real different animal that we're seeing.
Well, and take this last Pacquiao fight. So this was the first fight that Pacquiao had that he didn't use Fred in almost 20 years, right? So Pacquiao came on the scene in North America in 2001 when he fought Lalo Ledwaba. And I remember, I've always been close with Freddie Roach. I remember when Freddie Roach was a fighter, he was schoolboy Freddie Roach, right, back in those days. And I'm old enough to have covered Freddie as a fighter.
Right.
But, I remember one day when De La Hoya was fighting, what was the Spanish guy's name? Javier Castillejo. And Manny was on the undercard of that fight. And I went to talk to Freddie, who I saw at Mandalay Bay Casino, about James Toney, because he was training James Toney. And Freddie answers the questions about James Toney, but he says to me, dude, you have to see this kid that I'm training now. He is unbelievable. And I'm like, who is it? And he goes, Manny Pacquiao. And I go, who? Manny Pacquiao. And he was I think a super flyweight moving up to super bantamweight, if I remember correctly, right? And okay. At that time, nobody in the U.S. gave a shit about flyweights or super flyweights, right? And so nobody knew who Manny Pacquiao was. And Freddie is just going off on him, going, this guy's going to be one of the all-time greats. So I wrote about Manny on that show. And I wrote about Manny for a couple fights. And I think then, with the second Eric Morales fight, there was 3 Morales fights. Fred came in for the second Morales fight. And from that point up until this fight against Barrios, Fred was his publicist. And it was brilliant what he did. And he built Manny into a megastar. Manny did his part by winning the fights in the ring and by being one of the best fighters in the world. And Fred did his part by always coming up with angles. And you think of all the stuff that Manny did, and it's Fred getting that word out there, right? And I could tell you so many stories about it. That is what good PR is. And you saw how it utterly failed in this fight against Barrios because they were too cheap to pay Fred. And he wouldn't work for nothing. And so as a result, the promotion bombed. With Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah, that speaks volumes here as to how valuable a PR and the media are in this point. Well, Kev, let's take this in for a landing. There is a documentary coming out that I'm finishing up now. It should be done by the end of the week here. I'll be putting it out there of Kevin Iole with that International Fight Week experience. It is, I've showed it to a few people, and they can't believe how much stuff goes into it. They don't understand the quality of they don't understand the quality of work you've done over the 40 years that you've been doing this. And then we will put that out there. And then after that, Kevin, we'll have to turn our attention to after this, coming week. It'll probably be September. Look at September 13th for the Canelo fight.
I'm looking forward to that. I'm really interested to see how Zuffa Boxing promotes this. Now, this is not part of their. This is like a one-off fight, right? This is not part of their series, right? So, and I think there's a lot of questions still to be answered about what this Zuffa Boxing series is going to be. But I'll say this: if Dana White actually is a participant in it and really works it, I think it has a chance to be successful. If Dana just shows up on fight night, I don't think so, right? So, I said this on Chris Mannix's podcast, and I'll repeat it to you. What they need is less turkey, more Dana, and if they get more turkey and less Dana, then, I don't care who promotes it, it's not going to work, right? And I don't say that to rip Turkey, but I think, Turkey is not a world-class promoter. Dana White is the greatest promoter who ever lived. And he has built an infrastructure that will be able to promote this show. But if he's doing other stuff and not devoting his full attention to it.
And here's my thoughts on that. Just what I've seen, and that was from me looking at it at 30,000 feet. Again, you were working that day. I had seen it. In my opinion, I don't think Dana's happy. Just from what I see, he just doesn't. He snapped at the media last week. It just seems like there's something going on there. I don't know. I don't know anything. I couldn't even tell you. But to me, it seems like it's a guy who has not just lost control, and he could have possibly lost control somewhere of, corporate America just gets involved. They just get involved. They got to get their fingers in everything. Dana White was a different person 5 years ago, and rightfully he has to. When you become a billionaire, things change. But there is something there in whether it's boxing, UFC. That's my opinion. I just don't.
Do I answer that, or we just leave that?
We could leave that, but Kev, here's why I say that. He just doesn't seem happy. For some reason, I don't know. I'm not going to get into defend Dana mode, but let's just talk about one thing: his performance last week at the post-fight press conference. And I think what you're referring to is Mike Bond's question. Mike Bond from MMA Junkie asked Dana a question about a report that was in LV Sports Biz about the expansion of Apex from 1,000 to 10,000 seats. The woman who wrote the article is a good reporter. Her name is Cassandra Cousineau. She goes by the Sportsnista. She is a good reporter. She knows what's going on. Somehow she made a mistake, and I haven't talked to her, so I don't know what the mistake that she made was. It was a zero. It was a zero at the end of it. Was 1,000.
Well, but she said it was going from because the capacity has been a little bit less than 1,000. She wrote a story that said it was going to be an arena of 5,000 to 10,000. That's what she said. It was never going to be 5,000. So if she said it was going to just go to 10,000, yeah, she put one extra zero. It became a mistake. But I don't think that's what happened. And again, I did not talk to her, so I haven't heard her side of it. I'm just trying to piece together what I know.
Right.
And
that was the retraction. The retraction.
Correct. The fact, hey, we're going to have a 10,000 seat arena. Now, you were at Apex. You and I were at Apex. There's not enough land there to make it a 10,000 seat arena. The expansion they did that was in progress when you were there was so they could put more bathrooms in there, because for the amount of people that they had in there, they didn't have enough bathrooms, right? So forget about 10,000 people. But she somehow made a mistake, and somehow Hunter Campbell got quoted in the story when he was never interviewed. And Cassandra is not a person that I know to make stuff up. So I think somewhere wires got crossed. She didn't know who she was talking to, and she thought she was talking to Hunter. And, I'm not exactly sure what happened, but the reason I bring that up is Dana's reaction. I think Dana has gotten mad. Why he's gone to the influencers is because there's been so much of that happening, right? So, like over the years, you would have these reports of fights that were happening that nobody ever talked about, and that would annoy him, or that type of thing. And so I think he just has been so pissed about incorrect reports that I thought he was wrong to go off the way he did, especially given her reputation. Like, it's one thing if I make a mistake and he knows me and he knows I'm not, I'm usually accurate. Okay, I made a mistake. Talk to me privately, but don't go publicly, bashing me until hey, if I did it on purpose and I intentionally tried to be wrong, then yes, bash me, right?
Right.
It's our job as media to get it right. So I think she deserved that, conversation privately. But I think he's been so fed up with mistakes and, half truths for a long period of time that I think he's not willing to take it anymore. And he says, hey, I have a wheel. I disagree with this idea, but I think, he says, I have this influencer network that'll take the place of the regular media. And I think that he's done with the regular media. And so that's my sort of take on it. I don't think he should have went off the way he did. And I think he should have made it a point to talk to Cassandra privately to figure out what happened, not just to blow her up like he did.
Yeah, and I met her at International Fight Week. Nice woman. She was pretty nice, and like you said, she's a good reporter.
But yeah, I mean, there's never is she Woodward and Bernstein? No, but no, I mean, nobody's ever sat there and said, Cassandra gets facts wrong, makes stuff up. Nobody's ever said that. Everybody sometimes the media gets this bad rap. And I'm going to defend the media a second because I spent a lifetime in it. When we make a mistake, it freaking kills us. I mean, I die inside, even a small mistake. It kills me, right? You don't understand that. And people think we're making it on purpose. And these people that, flip burgers at McDonald's and then they want to rip us. Like, they drop a burger on the floor, they pick it up, put it back on the griddle, right? Okay, you shouldn't do that, right? But does that make you the worst person that God ever put on the face of the earth? You made a mistake in the moment. They don't realize that the reporters are human too. Now, I think what's happening is you see these, again, they're influencers. It's politics, right? People are playing tribes. You have your liberals, you have your conservatives, and they're playing one against each other, and they're not actually reporters, and they're in both, but the people that actually are reporters are trying to do honest, legitimate work across all aspects, not just in fighting and everything. But the media has been marginalized, by now. It used to be years ago, you couldn't do what you're doing right now. Correct. Years ago, right?
Correct.
You can go out there and then you can go on Facebook or social media and say, hey, Fred, can I interview Manny Pacquiao? Or hey, Kevin, you interview me? And you can make a name for yourself, and you've done great doing it. But a lot of those people that do what you did, they have a partisan slant, whether liberal or conservative, and then they want to, or whatever other area they're in, and they want to go out there. There's some people, you take boxing, there's some people that are pro PBC, some people that are anti PBC. Like, how the hell are you anti-pro or anti-promoter, right? You're just like, you evaluate the work they do on a individual basis going forward, but you can't be, well, I'm a pro PBC promoter and everything PBC does is great, or I hate PBC and Al Heyman is the worst. But that's what we have out there in the new world of media, where people who weren't classically trained get into it and do it.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I still stand by what I say about Dana. I mean, I know look, I just know how business is. It is stressful and whatever. And when you lose a little bit of that control, I would be surprised if Dana has as much control as he does with Turki Al-Sheikh. And I think that bothers him a little bit. So I don't know how far this Zuffa box is going to go. Maybe separate from Turki and they do something totally different. Maybe. I don't know. But I don't know. Dana's not a guy I think who gives up control. I just don't think he does. Just from what I've seen. And I don't know as nearly as much as you do. But I just from what I see, the bits and pieces, I said, man, this is a little different. And I know I can only go by how he treated me, and then what I saw, not less than 18 months later. A little different, just a little different. It seemed like there was a little different stress levels. I don't know. It's me. Well, either way, Kevin, it's always good to have you on, and we'll be speaking more frequently, and hopefully you'll get out of this little vacation you're on and get back into the grind here more frequent.
Well, I love doing this, right? So, and as I told you, you may see me write some things on Medium, but am I going to be a full-time reporter going out there? Nah.
Well, you don't have to be a full-time reporter. You come on here, pop on, crack a couple jokes.
Well, I have never said no to you, nor have I ever said no to. Since I retired, I've done a lot of podcasts and a lot of interviews. I never say no. One of the reasons that is, right, journalism gave me so much, right?
Mhm.
My life, this beautiful home that I live in, everything that I have in my life came because of journalism. And so I know how important access is to a journalist. And if somebody wants to interview me, how can I be a dick and say no? Right.
Mhm.
I want to give back to something that was good to me. And so I will say yes, no matter what. Now, if you abuse me and, I get on the air with you and you're trying to mock me or whatever, okay, then I may not go back on with you. But I'll go on with anybody who's serious, right? Who's trying to make it. And I've gone on with all qualities. I've been on from, network television and, Jim Rome and ESPN and all those things to people just starting out. And I've seen the gamut from, one side to the other. And I don't discriminate. I'm just as happy to go on with the person who's doing their first interview as I am to go on Nightline with Ted Koppel. Right. And no matter which side you want to say. But I think, journalism has been so good to me. That's why I want to defend it. So
No,
I will always go on with you, George. And I'll even go on with Jersey Jay-Z, for God's sake.
I said, would you draw the line at Jersey Jay-Z? Is that the line you're going to draw? Or no? Would you
even Jersey Jay-Z I'm with. Coach Deere might be the one that we have to draw the line on.
Jersey Jay-Z is live tonight. He's live tonight. And I'm going to have to tell him, give you a call. You might be talking about the Jake Paul fight. So it might be a good opportunity for you to slide right in there.
Okay, well, I might be in.
I'll give him the contact. Okay, Kevin, as always, good to hear from you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, brother. Appreciate you.
See you, buddy.